Hi, I'm Heather from GG Stitching, and today we are going to start sewing our baby quilt. You should have gotten the instructions for cutting everything out in the last video for either the basic baby quilt or the basic lap quilt, depending on what you want to try. So today we will start piecing those or sewing them together. We're going to sew the blocks into rows and press, so you're going to actually have practical application from that pressing versus ironing. And then we're going to talk about chain piecing. You do not have to do this if you're not comfortable with it yet. If you need to do block by block by block in order to not get confused in your rows, that is perfectly okay. I am going to show you how to chain piece though and make it a little more efficient if you're really trying to do something fast. Do not feel you have to do this. This may take practice, but if you've been sewing for a while and not necessarily quilting, you might be a fast sewer and this would be really easy for you. Do not feel you need to do that though. Whatever is more comfortable for you to get your rows done properly is perfectly okay. I just want to show you different options that you have. So, are you ready? Let's get quilting. Okay, so we are going to start laying it out. You don't have to do this for necessarily an easy quilt if you can follow the picture really well and you can just sit and sew. But if you have different colors that you chose and you're wanting to play around with the layout to see how it would look before you sew, you can make yourself a temporary design wall or have one, make one. I'm just using an old piece of batting that I'm just going to use for this. You can use flannel. You can, the back of an old tablecloth that has the flannel on there. I've heard those work really well. Some people actually have one up on their wall. At my home office, I do have one up on my wall to work with. So you can use a design wall to see how your layout is going to go. We're using 3 colors, so I'm not going to lay this completely out, but it would give you an idea of what you're doing. So we're doing an 8 by 10 grid, and if you want to mess around with how the colors are going to go, you can do that, and this is a great visual way to see if your fabrics are going to work well together. So in other words, you would lay everything out, a few rows at a time. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that would make 8. And then go on to the next one so that you can see the pattern. So this would be the white, purple, and you can actually start seeing, because in this case, I have it going, when you look at the picture, I have the green and the purple making a diagonal stripe. Okay, you get the idea though. So in other words, you can start laying it out and then you could actually sew from the rows so that you're able to keep track of what your design is. This one is very basic and you have the diagram from the photo. So as I'm sewing, I'm actually going to just sit and sew. I'm not going to lay the whole thing out, but I wanted you to see how you could use a design wall if you wanted to mess with the pattern at all. So in other words, if you wanted to mess with the pattern, I mean, you could do purple, green, white. You could mess it around. You could make it a little more visual that the diagonal stripe isn't just going one direction. Completely up to you. As long as you end up with an 8 by 10, meaning 8 squares across and 10 squares down for your pattern, it will work out. All right, so we are at the sewing machine and we're going to get ready to start. So a couple of things. If you have a sewing machine that has a needle up down button, if you're not sure what that is, check out your manual. Some machines have a button on their machine that will let you do the needle down. And if you start with the needle down, it will stop with the needle down. And that's actually very helpful for accuracy. If you don't have one, that's okay. You just have to watch for different things. So I start off everything with a leader. That's just a scrap piece of fabric here. And what that does is it helps control the threads. So you've got the top thread and you've got the bobbin thread. And I don't know if you've ever sewn and you get that bird's nest and you hear that clunky thing that goes on in your machine. That is because of the bobbin rotation and the timing of your machine when your machine stops and where your take-up lever is that handy dandy little thing up here that the thread goes in. And if it isn't in the proper position all the way up at the top of the stitch, that means that there's excess thread sitting in the bobbin. It hasn't completed the stitch. And then when you go to sew, that excess thread makes a clunky noise. It gets all tangled and causes, a mess in there. One of the ways to control that is to have a leader. And that scrap piece of fabric starts and stops when you stitch, and that will hang on and secure those threads, and you're not going to have that problem. So I always use a leader. You will see that in everything that I do. So, okay, so we are going to sew the first row. We're going to do this where we sew block 1 to block 2, and then we'll sew block 3 to the end of that, and so on and so forth to do the first row. And then later on in the video, I will show you how to chain piece if you want to be able to do multiple blocks quickly to be able to do the rest of the quilt. If you don't want to chain piece or it seems confusing, you can do all of the rows the way that we're going to do these now. You can do one row at a time so that you don't get confused about the blocks. So for row 1, we start with one purple and one white, and we want to make sure that the right sides are together. So on the white, it's a little harder to see, but the print is there, and we're going to line that raw edge up. And hopefully, if everything is cut right, they should match. There shouldn't be anything hanging over on either one of them. If they're not matching, you may want to go back and check the cut of your blocks and make sure they're right. So I have a leader in here. So that leader is hanging onto the tails of the thread. Make sure we don't get any bird's nest underneath there, any tangles. And so we line this up right underneath the foot and just start sewing. We get to the end of the block, we stop, cut that leader off, put the leader under the foot, sew till you get almost to the end of the leader, and now cut that, and we have blocks 1 and block 2. So we're going to add block 3, which should be a green one. So right sides together, make sure those edges line up nice and neat. As long as everything's lining up neat, you don't need to pin anything. Line that up under the foot. Stop when you get to the end. Cut that leader off. Open that up. Got 3 blocks. So we're going to grab another white now. Making sure that the right side of the white is to the right side of the green. Make sure our edges are lined up. Cut that leader. Okay, so we've got the first 4. We're ready to do purple again. Right sides together. Make sure those edges line up. Cut that leader. I'm opening these up and making sure that when I look, I can tell that everything is the right side is up. Everything looks good. That way, if I need to seam rip, I would be doing it as soon as I notice. Take a white, right sides together. Cut the leader off. That up. We're ready for our green. Right sides together. Leader. And now we're ready for the last block. So the last block, we're going to add the white. Trim that leader. Okay. So we have our 8 block row. So row 1 is done. I'm going to take it to the iron and I'm going to press the seams towards the colored blocks. So what we're going to do is in that first row, when you look at the pattern, first row has a purple and a white. So we're going to take those first 2 squares, and that's in both. That's with the lap and the baby quilt. And we sew right sides together. So you can see the white, it's a little harder to see, but this is the right side of the white. The pattern is up top. And here's the right side of the purple. And so it's right sides together, and we're going to be sewing a 1/4 inch seam. Now I have a 1/4 inch seam foot on here. I've tested my stitch width. So I will also do a video. Make sure you watch that video about how to get the perfect 1/4 inch seam. And you're just going to push that, put that underneath there, and sew. And then I'm stopping right as I get to the end, but I'm leaving it there because I'm going to do what's called chain piecing. So if you've never heard that, chain piecing is a way that we keep sewing and that little thread ends up between and it makes a whole chain. It's basically an efficiency thing. It makes it go much faster. So when I look at my pattern, I've already done the purple and the white. That's what we just did. So now I have a green and a white. So I'm going to go and I'm going to grab my green and my white. Same thing. I need these to be right sides together. So I'm going to find the right side of the white, right side of the green. And all I'm going to do is tuck that right underneath the toe of that. See how I have a split here? They're not completely together. I'm leaving one space there that you're going to end up with a couple of just empty stitches. Basically, that's where the chain comes from. And I'm going to go ahead and sew. There's my 1/4 inch seam. So now I'm going to go back, stopped at the end. We've done the first 4, so we did the purple and white, green and white. Now we're going back and doing another purple and white. So in the pattern, when you see RST, that stands for right sides together. I'll add that to the terminology sheet and have this in the description. I'll have a link to that dictionary term sheet for quilters. And then I know that my last 2 in this row is going to be another green and white. So looking for the right side of the white. See if you can see it there. Line up the edges. And if your cutting's right, these should line up. You know, they should be even. There shouldn't be any overhang. And that's why I don't need to pin them together. Okay, so that's the end of row 1. Now, you could go and keep doing that. Start row 2. For the sake of what I'm showing you, I'm only going to do row 1 so that you can see a completion of the row. and then we'll move on from there. So I reached the end of the row, and now I'm going to go and I'm going to take that leader, and I'm going to stop at the end of the leader so it's ready to go for the next one. I'm going to reach back and I'm going to clip these apart. So see how they've made a chain? All right, so now I'm going to clip them apart. And we're going to go and press. Okay, so we've sewn our first squares, and now we are going to press. And remember in the video that you watched, hopefully watched before, there's a difference between pressing and ironing. So now that we have things that are cut, we're not gonna iron, so we're not gonna do that back and forth motion. We want to press, which is just a straight up and down to set the seams. Now, we are going to be pressing in one direction for this pattern. So what that means is here's your seam. In some patterns, they may tell you to press it open, which then that would be that there that we would press open. In this case, we're going to be pressing to one side, and we're going to be pressing away from the white in this case. So we're always going to be pressing towards the color. That means that the seam should be going the direction of the colored block. So it would be in the purple or the green in this case. And what I'm going to do is actually press from the front first. I want to make sure that I have this open completely, that there's no folds, no extra fabric. You want to make sure this is nice and open, or else the measurement's not going to work. So what I typically do is the fabric that I'm pressing to is the one that's on top, because then it's easy to put your fingers in here, push it over, and see and feel that the seam is going towards that fabric. The other way that you can tell is that you end up with what's a high side of the seam and a low side of the seam. You can see it here because I haven't pressed yet. When you have no seam allowance underneath here, that makes the low side. All of the seam allowances under here makes it a little bulkier. That makes it the high side. So that's how you tell the difference there. So what I'm going to do is make sure that I finger press this open so that it's nice and flat. I'm going to get my iron and I'm going to set it down. No going back and forth. None of that back and forth motion. And then set that seam. Now after this, if you want to flip it over and give it a press on the back side as well to make sure that it's nice and flat, you can do that. But you want to make sure you check it and make sure there's no folds or any excess. This is open all the way. Otherwise, your measurement's not going to end up fitting right. So that's how we're going to press all of these blocks. All right, now that we have those pressed, we're going to put these together to make our row. So our first set should have been this. When you look at the picture, you're going to see purple, white, green, white, purple, white. So it should go like this. And we're going to go now and sew these together. Okay, so we're taking the right side of the purple and white. We need to join it to this. We're going to flip it. Right sides together. Match those seams. I'm going to do it one more time. Now we have two segments that have purple, white, green, white. Now we're going to sew those together so that it continues the pattern. So that purple should be the next to go here to finish the pattern. And now row 1 is done. So we're going to go press this now, and you'll see what the whole row looks like. Okay, so here's row 1. See it a little better there. So that's row 1, and we're going to now just continue on to make the remaining rows. So you're just going to keep going on in the same method. So just follow the picture, because remember, they're going diagonal. So the first one in the next row is not going to be the same as this one was. So in this case, the first one is going to be a white and then a purple. And so it's going to kind of flip-flop from what we did before. So in our next row, it's going to be the white, making sure that we pay attention to the right sides together. Right sides together with the purple. And we're going to chain piece. The next one should be white with a green. And we're going to continue on. Okay, so now all of the squares for row 2 are together in pairs right now. So this is where we stopped with row 1, and we started to put the next row together for row 2. Because I'm going to chain piece and make it quicker, I'm actually going to leave these in here, and I'm going to move on to row 3. If you are comfortable doing this, then just keep going and chain piece these together. And otherwise, if you're not comfortable, take this off, sew the next squares together, and that will just do it row by row, whichever way you are more comfortable. Okay, so I have finished chain piecing all these together, stopping with my leader in there. And now you can see I've got all of this. These are all those blocks together that I've chain pieced, and now I'm going to go and clip that. So one of the things, I guess that would make it easier if you are going to chain piece and you want to do that for this pattern with the layout that I created, you can do one white block to one green and to one purple. So in other words, you can just sew them all and make it easier for you if you'd like, so that you end up with pairs. Those pairs will be one white block with one colored block. And you'll need all of those then to make the row. So I'm going to go through and cut these, and then we're going to press them, Same way we did that first row, pressing to the colored blocks, seams in one direction. Now, I've seen lots of handy dandy little tricks, kind of like putting your seam ripper in the top of your spool so you can just do these really quick. I don't have anything set up like that here, so I'm just snipping. I'm a quick enough snip that it's not too bad. All right, now I'm going to go press. Okay, so got them all pressed. So we have our 2 stacks now of pressed. And now we'll start putting these together to make our rows. And this is where then, so if we have all of these together and you have not done it row by row, block by block, and you've done it where you chain pieced, you just need to pay attention to which one you're starting with, so that way you start with the right squares. So for row 2, it would start with a white and a purple, and then have to go to, white and green. Whereas in row 3, it starts with green and white. So you just have to make sure that you pay attention to the orientation as you start sewing them together so that you end up with the rows correctly. At this point, you may want to do one row at a time. If you're a more confident beginner, you could, chain piece and keep going, meaning like for row 2, you could start with piecing the white and purple together and a white and green together, and that's row 2. And then you could chain piece in the green and white, purple and white, so that way you have a chain going. And then you'd go back and grab the first one for row 2 and add the next one. That might be confusing if you're brand spanking new and just starting out. So you may want to just do row by row, square by square, until you get used to what you're looking at and how things go together. So the next step is to make the rows.
So now I'm looking at the pattern, and we've already completed row 1. So we're looking to start at row 2, and we have the 2 unit blocks. So that means the first one I'm going to pick up would be blocks 1 and 2 of row 2, and blocks 3 and 4, and I'm going to sew those together to make a unit. And then I'm going to be choosing 5 and 6 and sewing them to 7 and 8 to make the last 2 sections of row 2. And then I'm going to look at row 3, and I'm going to pick up the colors for blocks 1 and 2, and I'm going to sew those to blocks 3 and 4 for row 3. And then I'm going to pick up 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 for row 3 and sew those together. Once those are through the machine, I'm going to clip the first 2 off. Those would be the 2 sections that are going to make row 2. And I'm going to sew those together, and that will complete row 2. As that goes through, I can then clip off row 3, and I can sew those together. And I can repeat this process to get all 10 rows. Now, if this is too confusing, you don't have to do it this way. You can sew it block by individual block as you pick them up and do each row individually. This is if you want to do chain piecing or you know how to do chain piecing and this doesn't confuse you. This is how I'm going to do it, and it makes it go really quick. So if you're able to follow along with your pattern in the pictures, you want to follow this. If you can't, that is perfectly okay. Just make sure that you sew each individual block as it goes by the pattern and the picture for row to row.
Okay, so the rows are done and pressed, and now we're going to lay them back out onto either the design wall or a bed or the floor, anywhere where you can lay it out and make sure that all of the colors are going in the right direction. Make sure there's no mistakes, because right now is a good time to be able to correct it instead of noticing something once the quilt is done. So with this pattern, you can see that each of the colors then makes a diagonal line in a row. So the purple all makes one line, the white, the green. So they make a nice visual flow through the quilt. And we'll be ready next time to start putting the rows together. So this is where we'll stop for this session. And you just want to get all of the rows together. So make sure that it looks like this if you're following the pattern. If you're creating your own pattern, then it won't look like this, but make sure that you lay it out and take a picture of it even. Make sure that then when you stop and you look at it, that there's nothing out of place, or if you picked a pattern that maybe has a little bit of direction to it, that one isn't going a different direction than all the others. And next time we will start sewing the rows together. Okay, that's 10 rows, and I'm going to go press that first part of our baby quilt or our lap quilt. If you have any questions, please ask. There is no stupid questions, as I've always said, and I will keep saying that to you. So if there's anything that didn't make sense, please ask away. Let's try that again, shall we? 3, 2. All right, we have finished our rows for our baby quilt, so first part is done. If you had any questions at all about this, please let me know. Ask away. Next video, we will actually be putting those together, so we'll actually be taking those rows and making the center of our quilt. So if you found this helpful or a good video, anything like that, please like, subscribe, comment, any of those things. It helps me know that you find this content helpful or what else you may want to see. So again, I'm Heather from GG Stitching, and until next time, happy quilting.